the purpose of this drawing is to discuss the isometric method for exercise 5-89. The easiest way to start this isometric is going to be using the top view that you generated for the top, front, right side views. To start, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a line at 30 degrees that's 35 long. Then I'm going to use information that I have over here by drawing the x-coordinate and the y-coordinate of this angle. I can then copy that information right over to here. This way I can avoid having to do the trig associated with this process. Rotating that 30 degrees makes this an isometric perpendicular. Then rotating this 30 degrees makes this an isometric perpendicular. I can then take a line 30 degrees back along the midpoint, 15. Copy the backside line that I have from here, and then rotate this using that midpoint so that it's lined up where it's supposed to be. Now I'm going to copy this over to this side, and I am going to copy this from here over to here. This is going to establish everything that I need for where these lines should be. So this line here is going to come right here to the end point, and this line here is going to come right here to the end point. Now I can erase these reference lines that I have in between, and I've got almost the whole bottom of this piece laid out. What I want to do next is I want to draw a line from here along that 30 degrees and come out 40. Then this line here is going to be along my 30-degree axis, and I'm just going to extend it to here and here. Now I can erase this line. Next I want to create my parallel lines here and here. So what I'm going to do is start my line command and shift right click and select parallel. Hover over this and then move up, and then it should tell me on my dynamic input parallel and the length. Now the length is kind of an indeterminate number because we don't know exactly how long it's going to be until we actually lay out this particular line here. So now I want to do the same thing over here. Shift right click, parallel. Select this and come over to here. Now one thing that we know about isometrics, and this is going to be slightly tricky down in this area, but it'll work out very well up here, is I need a line now that is parallel to this, or perpendicular to this. So by drawing a line from the nearest point on here to perpendicular gives me an orthographic perpendicular. Rotating that line 30 degrees gives me an isometric perpendicular. So now I can just extend, or first things first, let me go ahead and move this into place, and then extend to right there, and now I can trim out this portion. Over here, I'm going to do a line from here perpendicular to this one. Now this also needs to be rotated that same 30 degrees to show that it is also perpendicular. And it's not going to quite look perpendicular at first simply because of the angles involved. And it may be slightly confusing just because of the way it looks, but with that being rotated at 30 degrees, that is isometrically perpendicular now. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and begin to build the box of the things that I can see. So I'm going to copy these two lines and these two lines straight up 20, which is the height of this object. I can now draw my line straight down here, straight down here. We'll worry about laying out the fillets in a little bit. I'm going to come straight down here, straight down here, straight down here. I'm now going to copy this line up 8. And then I'm going to draw my line straight down here. And This one here needs to be, well, will be hidden by this in a few minutes. So let me go ahead and copy this line here up the same 20 that everything else is, and then I can trim out this portion right here. Now there's not much more that I have to do with this particular piece, except for locating that hole when I get to that point. So I know that I'm going to have to go back and fix a couple of things, but just to clarify this drawing, I'm going to start to eliminate some of the lines that I do not need to see and they may potentially confuse me. At this point, I'm going to come up the 35 that represents the total height for this piece, and then I'm going to come over the 35 and then back down. This is going to establish that back box. Well, now I can begin to cut out a few more things. So I'm going to trim out this, eliminate this line completely, eliminate this line completely because it's going to be hidden, and then I'm going to copy this line from here to here and extend it back to that point right there. I can trim out these two lines in here and this line right here. This is starting to set up what's going to become the overall bounding box of this object. I'm now going to copy this line up to here. The main purpose for that is so that I can draw a line from here to here. Now that can be trimmed based on where it's going to be hidden, and this this line right here, which represents the back of the object, I'm just going to delete for right now, and then I will also delete this. Draw my line back here, 15, 35, close that off. This line is going to come straight down, and this is going to intersect that. These two lines can now be trimmed, and a line in between drawn. This forms roughly the wireframe of what we're looking at. The reason this appears to be so sharp up here is simply because we're kind of looking at it on the point. Okay, from this point right here, what we can begin to do is locate some of the other features that are going to be important in this particular piece. First thing I want to do is, since this is going all the way to the bottom, is I want to trim this out, get rid of this, and draw the line that is going to be representative of the bottom of that piece. Now this comes out 40, so I know from here back 20 represents where my center point for that circle is going to be. Since I eliminated the midpoints of some of these lines, what I can do is take the midpoint of this, come straight down, and then come out along that 30 degrees 20. That's then going to locate that center point for me. So now I can do an ellipse, iso circle. Here's my center. Control E will change my isometric plane, and this has a diameter of 22. Go ahead and erase these two construction lines since I don't need them. Copy this down 8, which is the height of that circle. And now in here, I'm not going to see any of this bottom piece of this circle, so I can go ahead and eliminate that. Same thing is going to be true on this face here. 14 down from the top, I have another hole. So we'll come 14 down from the top, ellipse, iso circle, and we're going to put that right there. Control E changes the iso plane, and this has a diameter of 12. I can then erase this, and I'm pretty sure that the thickness of this block will not allow the back sides of these holes to be seen. Now, the last thing that has to happen on here, I'm not going to have you guys worry about the fillets so much on this, because the fillets are going to be pretty intensive depending on how they need to be done, in which case these fillets are all going to be kind of a nightmare to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay out our circles on here so that we can get our fillets and everything like that for this particular feature. So what I need to do is I need to think very carefully about what I'm doing here. I'm going to draw a line right over top of this. I have a radius of 10. So I'm going to come straight down 10. There's my 10, and then I need to come over here perpendicular to this one, or parallel to this one, so I'm going to say parallel to this, and there it's snapping it parallel, 10. This is going to represent the center point for this ellipse. So now I can do the ellipse, and I'll go ahead and use the center option. Here is my major axis, here is my minor axis. I can then trim what I don't need to see as part of that, and then draw my line right across here, keeping in mind that this line has got to be parallel to this. So I'm just going to say parallel, and just make that parallel. I'm going to copy this ellipse from here. Actually, let me just copy it using the corner point. It'll make life a lot easier. From here to here. And now I can trim these lines in here. And what that does is that establishes a somewhat rough fillet. If you look real closely, you're going to see that there's some things that are kind of still sticking up. So what you may want to do before you actually do that fillet is you may want to zoom in and just make sure that everything is where it is supposed to be. The other option is you can try creating the fillet in the opposite direction. Do a center fillet here to here, and then up to here. And it's actually going to be perpendicular to this. And this one here still has a little bit of a bubble over here, no bubble up top. And the reason we're getting this bubble is because the ellipse feature isn't actually, we would be needing to do a skewed ellipse. So the ellipse in this feature is actually slightly skewed even from what this is. Now there is really nothing to grab a hold of right here. There's no quadrant points or anything that we can use to actually line this up. So what I'll have you guys do is just do a small trim right here. And what that's going to do is give us a nice clean edge that we can work with. So then I'll trim out the back side of this, erase the bottom, and then copy this fillet from this side to this side. Once I then trim out all my lines, I have my completed fillet. And just for clarity, I'm going to go ahead and add the ISO lines in here at the starts and ends of the fillet so that everything is completely visible for that particular fillet. The circles in this case are going to be laid out the exact same way. I'm going to copy this straight up 10. And then the center point of this is 12 back. So I'm just going to do a lengthen command, total 12, and select this object. I should have selected the other end. Let me select up here. Okay, this now represents the center of where that diameter 10 hole is going to be. So to make it easier to create the ellipse, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this down 5 and up 5. That's going to give me 2 points to pick for that ellipse. And then I'm just going to draw a line from here to here. Actually, I'll go ahead and I'm going to lengthen this again. And the dimension that it was in was 12, so I'm going to make it 17. 17 being the 12 plus half of the 10. So for total, we'll go 17. I can now do an ellipse from here to here to here, and that is going to establish how that hole is going to look there. So what you all are going to be responsible for is putting in the other 2 holes here, and then laying out the 3 holes that are going to exist over here. Now, one thing to do, always double check, is make sure that no part of the hole is going to be seen through the other side. That way you can make sure that everything is correct. In a situation like we have right here, this is a situation where you would be able to see the fillet, but this is a very complex fillet in here, so the only 2 fillets I'm really going to require on this are these 2. If you have any questions on this, please feel free to ask.